Thank you very much to Alison Gardner for inviting me and for Helen and Jane for organising for me to come here today. I'm really relieved actually because everything that I've just heard is sort of along the same lines as what I'm going to talk about as well. So I'm really relieved it's not the opposite of what I was going to say, because that would have been difficult. And I'm quite excited actually, because it's not often that somebody actually asks you to talk about your son for 20 minutes solidly. I should start by saying that I'm just a dad. The only subject I'm an expert on is Elliott, my son. And even with him, I'm learning all the time. So I'm going to try not to generalise too much, and I'm also keenly aware that there are parents here today, some of whom are having a much rougher time than we are. Nevertheless, I think you might still recognise some of this story as your own. So Elliott's our only child. He'll be 3 in a couple of weeks' time. Like most people, we had certain expectations of parenthood. We imagined what sort of a chap Elliott would become. We pictured moments and milestones. About 15 months in, we realised he was different. Not long afterwards, the paediatrician told us that our son had social interaction and communication difficulties. He was diagnosed aged pretty much exactly 2 with autism spectrum disorder, an evolving learning difficulty and delayed development in all areas. Not quite what we had planned. So painfully, we had to dismantle our expectations and start again with a blank sheet of paper. Fast forward to today, and Elliott does what seemed unthinkable back then. He communicates. Here he is, asking to watch the opening credits to the best trilogy of all time.
I want Star Wars.
I want Star Wars. Good boy.
So, Elliott loves pizza, trapeziums, spinning tops, Virgin Pendolino trains, but not the diesel ones, panda, and ceiling fans. Trees in general, not a problem. This tree, big problem. He amazes and impresses us constantly. He's much hungrier to learn than we originally gave him credit for. And he's pretty happy. Most of the time. We've had moments to treasure, and sometimes it has been desperately hard. I don't want to pretend otherwise. We're excited, and we're scared about the future. So today I'd like to shine a light on some of the wonderful support we've had, but also ask how the provision for children like him, as well as for the parents of children like him, could be developed and improved further. Our early impressions of Elliott were that he was independent, always happier not being held, forever fascinated by his hand, his best friend, his right-hand man, very occasionally his left-hand man. And we noticed that he was amused by unusual things, like the pause button, the Facebook symbol, and the word Tuesday. One day, when he was about 50 months old, my wife was looking at a checklist of early signs of autism, and she asked me if I thought any of them applied to Elliott. That was the moment that everything changed. Until then, Elliott was just different, but from that moment on, with total certainty, we knew he was autistic. Thankfully, there was support at hand. The health visitor, Helen will be delighted to hear, saw us quickly and took our concerns seriously. And that was really important because some people at that point were saying, children are all different, you know, he is still very young, he'll grow out of it. Elliott's paediatrician, the enigmatic Dr. Williams, was proactive and made referrals without a diagnosis, including to Portage, now specialist support services, and speech and language therapy, and the Child Development Centre, who I must say were all excellent. He also referred us to genetics, and as it turns out, Elliott has 4 dodgy bits of chromosomes. Portage, which of course are now specialist support services, have been a great support. Vicky Fensom and Alison Gardner have so much knowledge and experience, like their colleagues I'm sure. It's reassuring just to know that they're involved, keeping an eye on things and offering practical help. They have particular knack of picturing things from Elliott's perspective, suggesting how he might be feeling and of coming up with imaginative ideas to overcome obstacles and to help him make progress. Next one I put on here is the Reflections course. I only added this in the last week or two because we've just been doing it 5 weeks in, 1 week to go. It truly helps to clarify your understanding of ASD, and it's full of stuff that you can actually use. The session on behaviour in particular has opened our eyes, and I'm sure it will make things easier during the years to come. But I can't help but wonder how many other parents are out there with children just like Elliott, who are lost and dealing with this all in isolation. We began speech and language therapy when Elliott was 18 months old, on average about a session every 2 weeks. And the more I've reflected on that, preparing for today, the more I've realised that I can't possibly overstate the difference speech and language therapy made. But it wasn't on the NHS. The setup at the time meant that there was no provision, not at least for Elliott at that age. He was too young. After a second attempt at a referral, we were offered a session every 4 to 6 months. We found it difficult to accept that the early intervention or early identification, such a huge advantage, might only amount to early detection. Interestingly, the first few private SLTs we approached also said Elliott was too young. The age of 2 seemed to be about the earliest anyone would consider taking him on. So perhaps it might be helpful to maintain a list of private SLT practitioners and to share that list with parents so that regardless of any constraints in the NHS, parents at least have information on all of the options. Anyway, from a lucky chain of phone calls, we eventually found Katie, an enthusiastic and talented therapist who was happy to help. And I think the thing is, and this is the really important point, the therapy isn't for Elliott. It wasn't then anyway. It was for us, the parents. It's been about teaching us to parent differently from the way we'd planned, differently from the way we ourselves were parented. And it hasn't really been speech and language therapy at all, but communication therapy. Most of the concepts are simple and logical ones, but having learnt them really early so that we could apply them every day, we've seen the difference they've made to Elliott's communication, gradually and steadily unlocking his potential. Luckily, my wife and I have pretty much always been on the same page, at least on this. I know that's a massive advantage. I can't imagine how much more difficult this would all have been had that not been the case. But I do know that plenty of people are in exactly that situation, struggling to convince family that something's wrong, of course at the same time that they're trying to help their child, single-handedly. So what support is there for those families? During an incredibly stressful time, you need both parents to remain committed to supporting each other in order to support their child. So it's not a very British thing to do, to talk about relationships, let alone to discuss how much harder they can be to maintain with the added stress of raising a child with special needs or disabilities. But maybe it would help to initiate those conversations, prepare people, offer advice. So overall, we feel really very lucky with the support we've had. So I've already banged on a little bit about speech and language therapy. Some of the positives will be obvious to you as practitioners, parents and speech and language therapists. So just from our perspective, I want to tell you what this did for us. It gave us simple things to practice and focus on. Strategies were modelled and we got feedback to refine our technique. This is an important one. It really helped us to stay positive. We had so many appointments back then, and we often left them feeling a bit bruised and a bit downhearted. But we left every SLT session upbeat, even excited. We felt empowered at a time when we had control over really very little. The regular sessions motivated us to work hard, to do our homework between sessions, and it was useful to correct bad habits as early as possible. It was important to know that the time we were spending, particularly during the many months when there was almost no sign of progress, was being spent doing something worthwhile. It wasn't the right time to guess our way ahead with Google. We needed to trust that someone knew what to do when, frankly, we hadn't a clue. We've talked a little bit about early intervention, and I can see that that's going to be a theme that comes up, but this is perhaps very early intervention. So what could we really do at just 18 months? Quite a lot. Simplify our language, right back to single words. Definitely not a natural thing to do at first. So instead of, oh, look over there, it's a fluffy cat. I wonder what he's up to. He looks busy. It's just cat. Be consistent. Bed is always bed. It's not cot, depending on when you talk about it or who mentions it, so that everyone uses the same words. Follow Elliott's lead. When we tried to join him playing with the shape sorter, he sat there with, and Elliott immediately sets off to partake in a few rounds of open and close the cupboard. It was no use trying even more enthusiastically with the shape sorter. You have to embrace the cupboard. And yes, of course, he moved on to something else 10 seconds later. So it can be exhausting, and for long periods of time you feel like you're getting very little back. But we're not talking about chasing him around constantly, every waking minute. Just 5 minutes here and there throughout the day. Hold everything up to your face. Eye contact might not be the holy grail. Apparently it can actually be really uncomfortable for some people. But face contact is useful. It encouraged Elliott to watch our lips as we spoke, and now we know he definitely lip reads when he's learning words. Waiting has to be the best trick in the book. It applies to everything. For Elliott, his processing time's about 5 or 10 seconds. You can almost measure it with a clock every time, actually. So that's when we're waiting for him to fill in the word in a song, make a sound, initiate another game. It still surprises us how much Elliott will do if we give him just a few more seconds. It sounds really easy, but it's surprisingly hard. So sometimes I count it in my head so I don't rush. Learning to create opportunities for interaction by becoming fun and important, intruding on his play, pausing in songs, and by becoming necessary to him, by deliberately keeping motivating toys out of reach, treats out of reach, so he has to go through us to get to them. Getting down to his level, eye height, the height that's really uncomfortable for your back. So in summary, there was plenty we could do, even at just the age of 1.5. When Elliott was 21 months old, we introduced PECS, Picture Exchange Communication System, again with coaching and support from speech and language therapist Anne Portage. If there is one strategy that has unlocked Elliott's potential more than any other, it has got to be PECS. It's all about making language visual. This is a good moment to highlight how professionally everybody has worked together. I know another thing that Helen's going to be delighted to hear, to support Elliott There has been no stepping on toes, no comments, no scoffing at the advice of others. Speech language therapists in the NHS and private have complemented each other and respected each other's areas of expertise. The management and staff at Elliott's nursery have been flexible and supportive and have welcomed the opportunities to learn from professionals like Vicky and Katie, the speech and language therapist. And as a result, Elliott's targets at nursery combine the advice from both of them. So having a good, productive relationship with his nursery there has been very important. And I think it's worth adding cooperation to my little list down there. So we started with objects of reference. In Elliott's case, snacks, also very much an object of desire, so that he understood he had to exchange something. He needed us to take the clip off the bag so he could have it. So, using a lot of hand over hand, we progressed from using the actual packet of snacks to a photo of the packet of snacks. And it's worth saying that it's really easy to make resources yourself. You don't have to spend a fortune on expensive systems. For PEC's card, you just need a camera or camera phone, printer, and a laminator. We had to fight our instinct to make life easy for Elliott. For instance, instead of one pancake for one PEC's exchange, we gave him a couple of pieces each time and got 10 exchanges out of it. Before long, he was requesting water, toys, songs, and even bed, using these little homemade cards. Gradually, we challenged him more and more, prompted him less, deliberately stood at the opposite end of the room. Again, waiting was the best trick. Waiting for him to bring us the card, learning to judge the right moment to prompt him to pass it over, always clearly saying the name of the PEC's card while holding it up to our face.
Wow, round and round.
Sometimes we'd be too eager to help him, and sometimes we'd wait too long and he'd drop it, forget it, and walk off. But he was surprisingly persistent. He'd drop a card, struggle to pick it up, walk a few more steps, drop it again, before putting it in our hand. It really helped to observe each other because you'd spot the missed opportunities much more clearly from the outside than from the inside. That said, taking feedback and critique from your partner isn't necessarily something we're naturally programmed to do. So filming interactions was easy and very helpful too. Some months later, Elliott started saying the names of PEC's cards as he handed them over. Eventually, he began making requests verbally without the card at all.
Bubba.
Bubble. Bubble. Wow! Get it! Get it! Bubble! Bubble!
That was last August. 7 months on, he still brings us some PEC's cards. Perhaps it helps when he can't quite remember the word. And that's more or less where we are today. We once had our hearts set on Elliott going to our local school just down the road, but as we've got to know him better, we've become more cautious about having our hearts set on anything at all. Since I was invited to speak today, he's made progress, but he's also developed new anxieties and difficulties dealing with everyday situations. We're just beginning to explore the various options for school. We want to be able to rely on Elliott's school to listen to us, his parents, and to use the knowledge and trust the judgment of his nursery, who have been supporting his development since the very start. As he grows older, we hope that the help we've had suddenly won't expire. and that professionals will continue to work together. Wherever he does end up going to school, nothing, of course, is more important to us than knowing he isn't just coping his way through each day, but that he's happy and safe. The sooner you let go of the child you thought you were going to have and embrace the one you've got, the happier you'll be, we think, and the happier they'll be. For Elliott, does it matter if he doesn't naturally make eye contact just because in our social language that means you're listening? Because there will be so many other things he will understand. After all, how many of us knew what a trapezium was? The longer a child with autism goes without help, the harder they are to reach. Starting early is such an amazing opportunity while the brain is plastic. I'm sure some of you have seen that before. And the government agrees, in all cases, it says, early identification and intervention can significantly reduce the need for more costly interventions at a later stage. It will be a challenge to improvise ways to build the difference between the document and the budget, and to protect, above all else, the Vickies, Alisons, and speech language therapists, whose roles I hope will be neither diluted nor jeopardised. So whatever emerges from this conference, I urge people to be creative and experimental with their ideas. It would be great if parents, at the very beginning of their journeys, no matter the age of their child, could access basic but valuable practical advice, as well as some emotional validation and support. So in summary, I can say we've had some very effective support from experienced professionals who've worked with each other. The Reflections course has validated strategies we've been working on and has introduced us to aspects of ASD which we may encounter on the road ahead. The knowledge is already there. Elliott is the living proof that it is possible to benefit from communication therapy, including PECs, much earlier than conventional wisdom might have it. So I hope that the timing of provision for children and their parents will be reviewed so that interventions, not just identifications, can be put in place as soon as possible. Before I finish, there's one thing I haven't mentioned. It's hard a lot of the time, but humour does help rather a lot. And we laugh at Elliott a lot, because he does stuff like this. I should point out that at this point we'd already walked him around the block about 8 times to try and get him to go to sleep. Hi, Elliott. Very dramatic. So thank you very much for listening. I'm sorry I've gone over a couple of minutes. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the conference.